Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Interviewers and Interviewing. We are in week 4 and we are going over chapter 3 today, which is about questions and their uses. Real quick, just at the start, I want to look at your homework assignment that is due on Friday. So you have a homework assignment that is based on chapter 3 and it's split into 2 different exercises. So you're going to download this Word document that I'm looking at right now, and you're going to fill out all of these question slots with your answers. So the first exercise is the identification of questions. So what I want you to do is to look at each question. There's 8 of them here. And I want you to tell me whether each of these questions is open or closed, whether the question is a primary question or probing, whether the question is neutral or leading, and then whether each question is a special type of question tool. And I have them all listed there for you. So you're going to answer each of those 4 items for all of the questions, for all of the 8 questions. So that is the first exercise. I'll talk a little bit more about that later in the video. And then for the second exercise, you're going to fill out each of these. There's 10 questions that I want you to identify. And you're looking at the question pitfalls. So there is something wrong with each of these 10 questions, and each of them commits one of the 10 common question pitfalls that I have listed on the assignment. So you're going to tell me of each of these, first of all, which question pitfall does the question commit? And then second, I want you to rewrite the question to eliminate the problem. So in other words, you are creating a new, better question that does not commit a question pitfall. A little hint is that each of the 10 question pitfalls is used once for this assignment. So that is a quick look at the homework assignment that you will be doing. Now I'm going to do my lecture on Chapter 3, Questions and Their Uses. We're going to first talk about the first half of Chapter 3, which is identifying the types of questions that you will use. And then the second half of this lecture, we're going to talk about the question pitfalls. And the question pitfalls can basically be understood as question no-nos. These are mistakes or problems that you can commit when writing a question for an interview, and that we want to avoid phrasing our questions in that way. So let's get started. Let me just start my slideshow there. Okay, so the first thing that we need to know about questions is that they can either be open or closed or somewhere lying in the middle. Open questions are the questions that you will all be using for the employment interview and the informative interview. So open questions, this is when respondents have considerable freedom to determine the amount and kind of information to give. In other words, you're just opening the floor up to your interviewee and allowing them to tell a story, explain their answer in depth. And there's different types of open questions or different degrees of openness. So you have highly open questions, which is when there's virtually no restrictions placed on the question. So an example might be, what was your first year of college like? And then the interviewee will answer in any way that they want. They could answer and tell you about their classes. They could talk about their social life. They could talk about the food that they ate on campus that year. You're not restricting their answer in any way. Another example, can you describe your mother? I'm not putting any restrictions on, the person could talk about physical characteristics, personality traits, whatever they want to talk about with their mother. Then we have moderately open questions. So these are still open. They allow the interviewee to expand on their answers and provide whatever information they want to give, but they're slightly more restrictive. So examples, what was it like taking college classes for the first time during your first year? Another example, can you describe your mother's personality traits? So I'm still asking open questions that allow you to elaborate, tell a story maybe, but I've restricted it a little bit more to specific categories. Now, some advantages of asking open questions. One, they're easier to answer. They allow people to elaborate and expand on their ideas and experiences and even tell stories. They can also encourage the interviewee to talk and to provide details that they find important. And you will get lengthy answers that reveal their knowledge level, uncertainty, feelings, perceptions, biases, experiences. You'll get stories. And that can be really great if you're doing an interview project where you need to gather lots of information and lots of details from your interviewee. Now, there are some disadvantages to using open questions that we need to be aware of. First, a single answer might take up a great deal of time. If you have a very talkative interview subject, they might talk your ear off and waste time in the interview if you're not able to control the situation. In the same breath, you might get unimportant or irrelevant information that has nothing to do with the purpose of the interview. And finally, they might withhold information that is actually important because they just don't really know what you're looking for if you're not restrictive enough. So just be aware of the advantages and disadvantages of open questions and when you might need to use them. Now, on the other end of the spectrum, we have closed questions. So this is when you have questions that are narrowly focused and restrict the interviewee's freedom to determine the amount and kind of information given. So this is most frequently what we see in surveys, where you're asked a question and then you just click whatever bubble you relate to the most. So there's different kinds and different degrees of closed questions. There's moderately closed questions. This is when you're asking for a specific limited piece of information. So example, what are your favorite foods? So there's still some freedom to expand and give details of your answer, but I've really narrowed the focus. I just want you to list your favorite foods to me. I don't want to know about your favorite colors, your favorite places to go shopping. It's a very specific question that I'm asking. Another example, which classes have you taken? So those are moderately closed questions. We also have highly closed questions. This is when you're asking for a single piece of information. So what is your hometown? I'm not looking for an essay question. I'm not looking for your life story. I just want you to answer with a couple words, what is your hometown? What is your career path? Is the same thing. I'm just looking for one quick answer. And then there are bipolar questions, which are the most restrictive. These responses are limited to only 2 polar choices. So example, are you a morning person or a night owl? Or do you approve or disapprove of the president's job performance? The most common type of bipolar question that you're going to see is a yes-no question. So, did you eat breakfast this morning? Is a very simple example of you can either say yes or no. There's no maybe, there's nothing in between. It's just a yes or no answer, and that would be considered a bipolar question. Another example, are you currently working? That would be a yes-no question. Now, some advantages to asking closed questions. They can be very helpful to us, especially sometimes in an employment interview or in your informational interview. If you want to ask a question where you just need a very quick piece of information, they're great for getting clarity. Another advantage, you can control the length of the answers that you want and get very specific information. They're very simple. They allow for more questions to be asked on more topics in less amount of time. And they're easy to record and tabulate, especially if you're conducting a survey study on a computer. The computer will just spit out the answers for you and will even create cute little pie charts and graphs for you to track your answers. Now, there are some disadvantages to asking closed questions. First, the answer could contain too little information. For example, you don't know why someone has a particular attitude and you don't know their degree of feeling. And the interviewee can give a quick, short answer without really understanding the topic. I'm sure we've all filled out a survey before where we just click an answer really quickly and move on. So there are some disadvantages to asking closed questions as well. But an interview can contain a mix of both open and closed questions, and oftentimes they do. Now, the other topic that we need to talk about are primary questions versus probing questions. So primary questions are questions that introduce the topics or new areas within a topic of the interview that you're doing. They can stand alone even when taken out of context. So when you can look at a question and understand the full thing without needing to know what happened before or after in the interview, That's typically going to be a primary question. So anytime in this class when you need to submit a rough draft interview guide or an interview schedule, I'm looking for your list of primary questions that you intend to ask. So some examples. Why did you choose your current major? How do you feel about rising crime across the city? Who is your celebrity crush? All of these are examples of primary questions, and in fact, every question that I've posed in this entire presentation so far is a primary question. They can stand alone. Now, then we have probing questions. So probing questions are also known as follow-up questions. This is when you receive your answer from your interviewee, but it's not, you want more information from them. Either you need to seek clarity, or you didn't understand something, or you just want them to keep talking about whatever they're speaking on. So you want to follow up with an additional question to probe deeper into their answer. So these are questions that dig deeper into answers that may be incomplete, superficial, suggestive, vague, irrelevant, or inaccurate. These questions cannot stand alone. They completely depend on whatever answer or whatever context was given from the interviewee in the answer that they just gave. So they depend on the interaction between you two. They're usually on-the-fly questions. Sometimes you can try to prepare follow-up questions beforehand, but a lot of the times it just comes about naturally through the interaction. When the interviewee gives you an answer, you want to probe deeper, you come up with a question on the spot to get more information from them. So we're going to talk about the different types of probing questions. Number one is silent probes. So these are just nonverbal cues that encourage the interviewee to continue speaking. So if you notice that your interviewee has fallen silent or they're a little bit hesitant to keep talking, you can give them a head nod, a gesture, a smile, something that just lets them know that it's okay to keep talking and to continue. Similarly, we have nudging probes. So these are just very simple and brief verbal cues to encourage the interviewee to keep talking. This could be something like go on, and, so, or then what happened. Anything that is just a quick little phrase that asks them to keep talking about whatever they were speaking about. So we have some other probing questions that we will talk about. The first one on the continued page is the clearinghouse probes. So this is where you gather any information that you did not think to ask for, and it typically comes at the very end of your interview. So an example, is there anything else you would like me to know? In an employment interview setting, this might be something like, is there anything else that you would like me to know about yourself? Or any topic that we didn't cover in this interview that you think is important. These are just meant kind of as a catch-all to gather any information that you didn't think about beforehand. Then we have informational probes. These are some of the most common types of probes. This is when you're asking for additional information or an explanation of whatever answer that the interviewee just gave you. So let's say they're talking about a topic, you think it's interesting, you want to know more, so you ask an informational probe to get more information. So that could be something simple like, tell me more about blank. Then we have restatement probes. So restatement probes are where you restate a part of the question that the interviewee didn't answer. So an example is if you were to ask, what are your dreams and fears? And they only answered one part of the question, then you can restate, okay, and what about your fears? Because you want them to give more information about that part that they didn't really touch on. Then we also have reflective probes. So this is where you are clarifying or verifying an answer. Did I really understand you completely? So that can be just checking in with the interviewee to make sure that you're on the same page. So my example, it seems like you aren't happy in your new role. Is that correct? Again, you're just checking in with that person to make sure that you're on the same page and that you're understanding them correctly. And we also have mirror probes. These are similar to the reflective probes. This is when you summarize a series of answers that they gave over a span of time to ensure that you understand correctly the sequence of events. So my example, so if I understand, you broke up with your boyfriend because he cheated, got back together with him, and are now planning a vacation overseas? So typically mirror probes are used when you have gone through some time in the interview and you want to just check back from beginning to the current place and time in the interview. Did I understand the sequence of events properly? And they'll either say, yes, that's exactly what happened, or they might correct a detail. So these are all the different types of probes. Be sure to review this chapter in the book to see all the different types of examples that they give. Now we're going to take a look at neutral versus leading questions. So all questions that you ask in every interview need to be neutral. So when a question is neutral, that means that we are not guiding the interviewee to give any particular answer. We are not influencing their answer in any way. So when you ask a neutral question, you're enabling the interviewee to decide upon their answer without direction or pressure. And it's important to note that both open and closed questions can and should be neutral. We don't want to be pressuring or guiding our interviewee in any way. So first is a leading question, or not first, but the opposite would be a leading question. And this is what we want to avoid at all costs. So a leading question is when you intentionally or unintentionally suggest the answer to the interviewer, or suggest the answer that the interviewer expects or prefers, and thus you are guiding the interviewee to give that answer. So you might unintentionally do this just by phrasing the question in a certain way. It's going to influence the way that the interviewee answers the question. So this can be due to interviewer bias. Let's say you're very excited about a topic and that excitement is coming through in your voice and your posture, your hand movements, and even the way that you phrase the question. Well, your excitement about this topic is going to kind of put pressure on the interviewee to also mimic your excitement, even though maybe they didn't feel excited about it before. Sometimes we can ask a unipolar question. So that's when one option is made less acceptable than another. So that might be asking, are you registered to vote, or do you not care about our state of affairs in the city? Obviously, no one is going to want to raise their hand and admit, no, I don't care. You've made that answer option sound very unattractive, and no one's going to want to admit that they agree with that answer option. And then we also have a loaded question. So this uses extreme language to dictate the answer. This can include emotionally charged language, name-calling, unequal answer options, or entrapment. And we're going to talk about each of these in the examples that I have on the next slide. So, leading versus neutral questions. All of these questions here on the left are a leading question. In other words, they are influencing the answer that the interviewee will give just by the way that you worded the question. So number one is a great example of entrapment. Have you stopped cheating on your wife? Well, you're assuming that the person does in fact cheat on their wife. Maybe they don't. You're also assuming that they have a wife. So a neutral way to ask this question without putting words in their mouth or accusing them of anything would be, have you ever cheated on your wife? That way, they have a neutral way that you've posed the question and they can answer yes or no. Number two is leading. When is the last time you got drunk? Again, that's assuming that they have ever gotten drunk. So a better way to ask the question that is neutral is, do you get drunk? Then you're not implying anything, you're not accusing them of anything, and it allows them to answer honestly and openly. Number three, do you hate work as much as everyone else? So the word hate is an emotionally charged word, and it's also putting pressure on the person to agree with everybody else that hates work. So a neutral way to ask the question is just, how do you feel about work? And if they hate work, they can tell you from there. But they might like work, so you don't want to suggest that or assume that. Number four is a great example of a unipolar question where one option is clearly better than the other, and you're also name calling. So number four, are you a liberal or a redneck Republican? Not too many people are going to want to enthusiastically be like, yes, I'm a redneck Republican. So you're eliminating a lot of answer options from them. A better way to phrase it might be, what is your political affiliation? Or are you liberal or conservative? Number five, you like watching Netflix on the weekends, don't you? Again, you're assuming, you're guessing what their answer might be. A better way to ask it that is neutral would be, do you like watching Netflix on the weekends? Or even, if you want to open it up even more, what do you like to do on the weekends? Number 6, do you support the mayor even though he cheated his taxes? So you're including a detail there that is not necessary to the question, and it might influence the person's answer. So you could just simply ask, do you support the mayor? And number 7, how did you feel about that terrible Ben Stiller movie? Well, the word terrible has a lot of emotions attached to it, and it's also your opinion that the movie was terrible. Other people might not feel that way, but you're sort of putting pressure on them to agree with you. So a neutral way to ask it is, how did you feel about that Ben Stiller movie? So all of the questions on the right-hand side are now neutral and okay to ask anybody. So let's take a look at exercise number 1 for your homework this week, and I'll do an example with you so you get the hang of it. So first, I want you to identify of those 8 questions on the worksheet, is the question open or closed? Then I want you to answer, is this primary or probing? In other words, can the question stand alone, or does it really depend on the context or the answer that came before it? Number 3, is the question neutral or is it leading? And number 4, is it using a special type of question tool? Bipolar, loaded question, nudging probe, clearinghouse probe, informational, restatement, reflective, or mirror probe. So here's an example. Did you eat breakfast today? So number 1, you'll want to answer, is this open or closed? And then you'll answer primary probing, neutral or leading, and the special type of question tool. So for did you eat breakfast today, this is a closed question. It is a primary question because it can stand alone. It is neutral. I'm not trying to sway or pressure the interviewee in any way. And this is a bipolar question because it's yes or no. So this is an example of what I want you to do for each of the 8 questions on the worksheet. And then we will move on to talk about question pitfalls. But this video is already getting a bit long, so I'm going to stop this one and start a new video to talk about the second half of chapter 3, which is questions and question pitfalls. So I'll see you in the next video.